The question came on an ordinary Tuesday, while Marcus was cutting bread for lunch and the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window at the angle it always did this time of year. "Papa." The youngest stood in the doorway, watching with those grey eyes that saw too much. "Why are there no pictures of you when you were young?" Marcus's hands stilled on the bread knife. The silence stretched between them, filling the small kitchen with everything he had never said. "There are some. Somewhere." I looked. "In all the albums. Mama is in lots of pictures. We are in lots of pictures. You are only in pictures from after we were born." The boy waited. 5 years old and already patient in a way that unnerved Marcus. Already willing to sit with silence until truth emerged from it. "That is a long story. I like long stories. This one is not for children." The boy considered this. Nodded slowly. Accepted the boundary without resentment but also without forgetting. Marcus knew the question would return. Questions like this always did. "Go wash your hands for lunch." The boy left. Marcus stood alone in the kitchen, holding a bread knife, looking at the empty doorway where his son had stood, and felt the weight of all the years he could never explain. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. 5 years had passed since the birth of the triplets. 5 years of sleepless nights and first steps and words that accumulated into sentences, into conversations, into the complex inner lives of 3 small people who had once been abstractions and were now undeniably real. The boys were distinct now in ways that went beyond physical appearance, though that too had differentiated. The oldest had shot up tall and lean, all elbows and angles, with his mother's grey eyes and a seriousness that sometimes worried Marcus. The middle one remained compact and explosive, a bundle of kinetic energy that left chaos in his wake. The youngest stayed small, watchful, the one who noticed things his brothers missed and asked questions his parents struggled to answer. The clinic had expanded. Celeste had brought in another physician, a young woman fresh from residency who had chosen rural medicine for reasons she explained with a kind of idealism that Celeste herself had once possessed. Watching them interact, Marcus sometimes caught glimpses of who his wife had been before grief and responsibility had settled into her bones. The garden flourished. What had once been dead earth reclaimed from neglect now produced tomatoes and herbs and flowers that Celeste cut for the kitchen table. The roses climbed the pergola they had rebuilt together, blooming in cycles that marked the seasons more reliably than any calendar. Marcus had settled into a life he never could have imagined during his decade of darkness. He managed the clinic's administrative work, handled repairs, helped with the boys while Celeste saw patients. The rhythm was ordinary in a way that still sometimes startled him. But ordinary did not mean easy. And healed did not mean whole. The afternoons were hardest. When the boys napped or played independently and the house fell quiet and Marcus found himself alone with thoughts he could not always control. The past did not disappear simply because the present was good. It waited in the silences, surfacing at unexpected moments, reminding him of everything that could not be undone. The decade he had lost existed as absence. Not a wound anymore, but a scar. Permanent. Part of him now in ways that would never change. He would have been a different father if those years had unfolded differently. Younger. More energetic. Able to run with his sons instead of watching them run. Able to project decades of future with them instead of calculating how old he would be when they graduated, married, had children of their own. 62 when they turned 18. 72 when they turned 28. The math was simple and relentless. He did not share these calculations with Celeste. They lived in the quiet space he maintained behind his eyes, the space where grief and gratitude coexisted without resolution. The middle son burst through the back door, disrupting Marcus's reverie with the full force of his 5-year-old enthusiasm. "Papa, there is a frog. In the garden. A big one. You have to come see." Marcus set down the book he had been pretending to read. "Of course. Show me." The frog was indeed large, sitting placidly on a rock near the fountain, seemingly unbothered by the 3 small faces pressed close to examine it. "Can we keep it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because frogs belong in gardens, not houses." The middle son's disappointment was theatrical and brief. Within moments he had moved on to digging in the dirt, searching for worms or beetles or whatever small creature might next capture his attention. Marcus sat on the garden bench and watched his sons explore the space he and Celeste had reclaimed from death. The oldest was attempting to identify plants from a nature book, pointing and naming with a precision he brought to everything. The youngest had settled near the frog, not trying to catch it, just watching. The afternoon light slanted golden across the garden. Somewhere in the house, Celeste was finishing with patience, her voice occasionally audible through the open windows. The world was exactly as it should be. And still Marcus felt the absence. The years that existed only as blank space in the photo albums his youngest son had noticed. The question would come again. It would keep coming as the boys grew older, more curious, more capable of understanding the truth. Eventually Marcus would have to answer it. But not today. Today he could simply sit in the garden with his sons and feel the sun on his face and try to be present in the only time that actually existed. Celeste emerged from the clinic as the sun was setting. Marcus watched her walk across the garden toward where he sat with the boys, and he noticed what he had been noticing for months now. She was tired. Not the ordinary tiredness of long days and demanding children. Something deeper. A weariness that had settled into her movements, her posture, the way she smiled. The young doctor followed her out, still talking about a case with the urgent enthusiasm of someone who had not yet learned to conserve energy. Celeste nodded, responded, maintained the conversation while somehow already being elsewhere. Marcus recognized that look. He had worn it himself during the years when existence felt like a performance he was too exhausted to maintain. The young doctor eventually departed. Celeste reached the garden bench and sat beside Marcus with a heaviness that made the wood creak. Long day. Long week. Month. Year. The boys were chasing fireflies now, the first of the season, their shrieks of excitement carrying across the twilight garden. The new doctor is working out. She is capable. Energetic. She has opinions about everything and the stamina to express them constantly. That bothers you. It exhausts me. Celeste leaned back, closed her eyes. I remember being that certain. That full of conviction that I knew how things should be done. Now I just want to get through the day without making anything worse. Marcus did not respond immediately. He had learned that Celeste sometimes needed space to continue, and sometimes needed silence more than words. I love them, she said eventually, eyes still closed. The boys. This life. You. All of it. But lately I feel like I am running on empty. Like I have been giving and there is nothing left. What do you need? I do not know. That is the problem. I do not know what I need because I have spent so long focusing on what everyone else needs that I have forgotten how to know. The fireflies blinked in the gathering darkness. The boys' excitement had mellowed into quieter exploration, the oldest explaining bioluminescence to his brothers in terms they definitely did not understand. Maybe you need to do less. Celeste opened her eyes. Looked at him. That sounds so simple when you say it. It is not simple. I know. But it might be necessary. The practice. Can manage. The new doctor is capable. You said so yourself. She could take on more. You could step back. And do what? I do not know. Something. Nothing. Whatever you need to feel like yourself again. Celeste was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than Marcus was accustomed to hearing. I do not know who that is anymore. Myself. I have been doctor and wife and mother for so long that I cannot remember what came before. What I wanted before other people's needs became the only thing that mattered. This was the cost of being the strong one. Marcus understood it in ways he rarely articulated. Celeste had saved him. Had pulled him from darkness and given him reason to live. Had built a family with him and managed a practice and held everything together while he healed. And now she was the one breaking. The boys came running, each clutching a jar with a firefly inside. They presented their catches with pride, demanding attention, admiration, the constant validation that children required. Marcus watched Celeste respond. Saw the effort it cost her to summon enthusiasm she clearly did not feel. Saw the mask she wore for their benefit, so similar to the mask he had worn during his own years of emptiness. That night, after the boys were asleep and the house had settled into darkness, they lay in bed without touching. I need to tell you something. Celeste's voice was barely audible in the quiet room. Marcus waited. Sometimes I resent you." The words landed like stones in still water. Marcus felt their impact ripple through him but did not react. "Not all the time. And not because of anything you do. But sometimes I look at you playing with the boys, healthy and present, and I think about how much I gave to get you here. How much of myself I poured into your healing. And I wonder what would have happened if I had used that energy on myself instead." The honesty was brutal and necessary. Marcus had learned that truth, even painful truth, was preferable to the corrosion of silence. "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes. Because I wonder the same thing. What you could have been if you had not spent those years fixing me." Celeste rolled to face him in the darkness. He could not see her expression but felt her attention. "I do not regret it," she said. "Any of it. The boys would not exist without those choices. This life would not exist. But I am tired. And tired makes me think thoughts I would not think otherwise. It makes me calculate what I gave against what I got and wonder if the equation balances. Does it? I do not know. Some days yes. Some days no. Today no." Marcus absorbed this. The resentment was valid. The exhaustion was real. These were not problems he could fix with reassurance or gratitude, though he felt both. What would help? She was quiet for a long time. "I think I need to stop being necessary. At least for a while. To everyone but myself." "Then stop. It is not that easy. I know. But I can take on more with the boys. The practice can function without you. The world will not collapse if you put yourself first. I do not know how to put myself first. I never learned. Maybe it is time to learn." The conversation did not resolve anything. There was no cathartic breakthrough, no sudden lifting of the burden Celeste carried. But something shifted in the space between them. An acknowledgement. A willingness to see what had been accumulating in the shadows. They fell asleep without touching. This too was part of marriage, Marcus had learned. The nights when connection required distance. When love expressed itself through respecting the space another person needed. Morning arrived with its usual demands. The boys woke hungry and loud and full of energy that seemed to regenerate overnight while their parents did not. Breakfast was chaos. Getting dressed was warfare. The ordinary tasks of morning consumed all available attention. But Marcus watched Celeste more carefully now. Noticed the effort behind her competence. The exhaustion she wore like a second skin. The young doctor arrived early, eager as always, full of questions about cases and protocols and the endless decisions that running a clinic required. Marcus intercepted her before she could reach Celeste. "Dr. Monroe will not be available today." The young doctor's enthusiasm faltered. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. She needs rest. You will handle the day's patients. Alone. You are capable. She says so herself." The young doctor processed this adjustment with the flexibility of someone who had not yet been broken by disappointment. She nodded, squared her shoulders, and went to prepare for a day of independent practice. Marcus found Celeste in the garden, standing before the roses with a cup of coffee she was not drinking. "I heard you. You needed someone to make the decision you could not make yourself." Celeste turned. Her eyes were red. Whether from crying or exhaustion, Marcus could not tell. "I do not know how to not work." "Then do not know. Just exist. Let the hours pass without filling them with tasks." "That sounds terrifying." "It is. But you taught me that fear was not a reason to avoid necessary things." She almost smiled. "Using my own words against me. Using them for you." They stood together in the morning garden, coffee cooling, the sounds of the clinic beginning its day drifting from the building behind them. "What am I supposed to do all day?" "Whatever you want. I want to be useful." "Then you will have to learn to be useful to yourself. It is harder than being useful to others." "I know." Celeste sipped her cold coffee. Made a face. Continued drinking it anyway. "You spent 10 years learning how to exist without purpose. I never had that chance. I went straight from medical school to residency to practice to you to the boys. I have always had something that needed doing. Maybe that is the problem." She considered this. Maybe. The day passed strangely. Marcus took the boys to the garden while Celeste wandered through the house, picking things up and putting them down, starting tasks and abandoning them, visibly struggling with the emptiness of unscheduled time. He did not interfere. This was her process. She had given him space to find his way back from darkness. He would give her the same. By afternoon she had settled on the back porch with a book she had been meaning to read for years. He watched her try to focus, fail, set the book aside, pick it up again. The discipline of rest was as difficult as any other discipline. The boys demanded attention. The oldest had a question about plants. The middle one had fallen and scraped his knee. The youngest wanted to show him a drawing he had made. Marcus handled each demand without pulling Celeste from her attempt at stillness. It was exhausting in a way he had not anticipated. She had been carrying so much more than he realized. Dinner was simple. The boys ate with their usual mess. Celeste pushed food around her plate without consuming much. The young doctor appeared briefly to report on the day, competent and slightly frazzled, already growing into the responsibility she had been handed. After the children were in bed, Marcus found Celeste on the porch again. The book lay unopened beside her. She was staring at the garden in the darkness. "I did not read." "That is all right." I could not focus. My mind kept going to the practice. The patients. Whether the young doctor was making the right decisions. She was fine. The clinic survived. I know. Rationally, I know. But being rational and being calm are different things. Marcus sat beside her. The night air was warm, carrying the scent of flowers and grass and the faint humidity that preceded summer. "When I was in the worst of it," he said slowly. "When I had not left my house in years and had stopped believing I deserved to exist. The hardest part was not the pain. It was the silence." Celeste turned to look at him. He rarely spoke about those years. "I had so much time. More time than I knew what to do with. And all of it was empty." The silence was not peaceful. It was accusatory. Every minute that passed reminded me that I was wasting what I had left. "How did you survive it?" "I do not know if I did. Not fully. Part of me is still in that house, in that darkness. I left something behind that I will never get back." He paused. The words were difficult. They always were, when they touched those years. "What I learned is that emptiness is not the same as rest. And silence is not the same as peace. You have to find something to fill the space with. Something that is not about being useful to anyone else." "What did you fill it with?" "The car. Maintaining it. It was the only ritual I had that connected me to who I used to be. Every week I would go to the garage and check the engine, the tires, the fluids. It kept me tethered to something. And now I have this. The garden. The boys. You. But I still maintain rituals. Small things that are just for me. They keep the darkness from creeping back." Celeste was quiet for a long time. "I do not have rituals. Everything I do is for someone else." "Then maybe that is where you start. One thing. Small. Just for yourself." "Like what?" "I do not know. That is for you to discover." The conversation ended there, but something had begun. Marcus watched over the following weeks as Celeste experimented with ways to exist that were not defined by service. She bought art supplies she had not touched since before medical school. They sat in a corner of the bedroom for days before she opened them. When she finally did, the first paintings were terrible. She showed them to Marcus with a grimace. "I used to be good at this. You will be again. Or I will not. And that will have to be acceptable." She painted when the boys napped. Bad paintings at first, then gradually less bad. The act of creating something that served no purpose but its own existence seemed to ease something in her. The young doctor took on more responsibility at the clinic. Celeste reduced her hours. The practice did not collapse. Patients adjusted. Life continued. But Marcus noticed other things too. The grief that surfaced now that Celeste had space for it. The accumulated losses she had never had time to mourn. One evening he found her crying in the garden, standing before a rose bush she had planted years ago. "Celeste." She did not turn. Did not wipe her eyes. "I was thinking about Benjamin. Her first love. The man who had died before Marcus knew she existed. I never really mourned him. There was not time. His death, then medical school, then residency, then work, then you. I kept moving because if I stopped I would have to feel what I had lost. And now I have stopped. And it is all there. Waiting. As fresh as if it happened yesterday. Marcus stood beside her. Did not touch her. Did not try to fix what was not his to fix. When he was dying. She continued, voice ragged. I was angry. Not at the universe or the unfairness. At him. For leaving me. For not fighting harder. For accepting death when I needed him to live. That sounds human. I felt guilty about the anger for years. Thought it meant I had not loved him properly. That I had failed him. You did not fail him. I know that now. But I did not then. And the guilt became fuel. I worked harder to atone for the anger I thought I should not have felt. And now I am finally feeling what I avoided all those years. And it hurts. God, it hurts. She cried. Marcus stood beside her in the darkness and let her grieve. This was not something he could carry for her. Some weight could only be borne alone. Eventually the tears subsided. Celeste wiped her face with her sleeve like a child. I am a mess. You are human. Same thing apparently. They walked back to the house together. The boys were asleep. The night was quiet. They sat on the porch as had become their habit. Thank you, Celeste said eventually. For what? For letting me fall apart. You let me fall apart for much longer. This is the least I can offer. She leaned into him then. The first physical contact in days. Her head on his shoulder, her weight against his side, her breathing gradually steadying. I do not know how long this will take. It takes as long as it takes. There is no schedule for grief. You are very patient. I had good teachers. They sat in silence. The kind that does not need to be filled. The kind that exists between people who have seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. The weeks continued. Celeste grieved in stages. There were good days and terrible days and days that were neither. She painted more. Worked less. Let the young doctor become the primary physician while she shifted to a supporting role. The boys noticed the change in their mother. The oldest asked Marcus about it directly. Is Mama sad? Sometimes. She is feeling some things she did not have time to feel before. Why now? Because now there is time. The boy considered this with his usual gravity. Can we help? By being patient. By letting her be sad when she needs to be sad. Okay. The middle son adapted by being louder, as if volume could compensate for his mother's reduced energy. The youngest adapted by being quieter, watching Celeste with those observant eyes, occasionally bringing her small gifts. A flower. A drawing. A rock he found interesting. Marcus watched his family navigate this new terrain and felt the familiar mixture of gratitude and grief that had become the baseline of his emotional life. Celeste was not being fixed. She was being honest. For the first time in years, she was letting herself feel the full weight of what she carried. And that weight included him. The years of his healing. The energy she had poured into pulling him from darkness. The cost of being the strong one when she had her own broken pieces that needed attention. He could not undo what she had given. Could not return those years or that energy. All he could do was be present now. Hold space. Let her process without trying to hurry her toward a resolution that would come in its own time, if it came at all. The summer deepened. The garden exploded with life. The boys grew visibly, their limbs lengthening, their faces losing the soft roundness of early childhood. Marcus took them to the beach one afternoon while Celeste painted. They built sandcastles that the tide would take. They chased waves that always outran them. They collected shells and rocks and bits of sea glass that would fill jars in their shared bedroom. Watching them, Marcus felt time's dual nature with piercing clarity. How slowly days could pass. How quickly years accumulated into decades. His sons were 5. Soon they would be 10, 15, 20. They would become people he could not fully imagine. They would have lives he would not fully see. The mathematics of his age made this inevitable. He would not be there for everything. Could not be. This was the cost of lost time. Not just what was missing from the past, but what would be missing from the future. The realization was not new, but it hit differently on a summer afternoon with the ocean stretching endlessly before him. His sons did not know what he had been, did not understand the decade that existed only as absence in the photo albums, did not grasp why their father moved carefully and tired easily, and sometimes looked at them with an intensity that had nothing to do with the present moment. Someday they would ask. The youngest had already started asking. And someday Marcus would have to tell them. Not everything. Not the details that would burden rather than illuminate. But enough. Enough to explain the missing years. Enough to account for the man they knew versus the man he had been. The prospect was exhausting. The story he would have to tell was not heroic. It was shameful and painful and did not cast him in a flattering light. He had been foolish. Had trusted unwisely. Had spent 10 years in self-imposed exile rather than face his humiliation. What lesson was there in that? What moral could his sons draw from their father's decade of weakness? He did not know. Perhaps the lesson was simply that survival was possible. That even profound brokenness could be addressed if not entirely healed. That love could find you in the darkness if you were lucky enough to stumble toward the right door in a storm. The middle son demanded attention, having found a crab he wanted to show everyone. The moment of reflection shattered into the immediate demands of parenting. Marcus let himself be pulled back to the present. That was the only place he could actually live. The past was immutable. The future was unknown. This moment, with sand between his toes and his son's excited voices filling the salt air, was all that was real. They returned home sunburned and exhausted. Celeste met them at the door, paint on her fingers, looking more at peace than she had in weeks. Good day. Good day. She held up a canvas. I finished something. The painting was not technically accomplished. The perspective was slightly off and the colors were not quite realistic. But it captured something. The garden in late afternoon light. The way shadows fell across the flower beds. A feeling more than a representation. It is beautiful. It is not good. Those are different things. She smiled. The first real smile in longer than Marcus could remember. I think I understand something now. That I have been trying to be good at everything. And the exhaustion is not from doing too much. It is from caring too much about doing things well. That sounds like a breakthrough. It sounds like something I should have figured out 30 years ago. The boys pushed past them, demanding dinner, shattering the moment of quiet insight. The evening resumed its usual chaos. But something had shifted. Marcus felt it in the way Celeste moved through the house. The way she responded to demands with patience rather than strain. The way she looked at her imperfect painting with something approaching acceptance. This was what healing looked like when there was nothing to reclaim. Not a return to some previous state. Not a recovery of what was lost. Just a gradual accommodation to what remained. A building of something new from the materials at hand. He knew this because he had lived it. Was still living it. Would continue living it for however many years remained. The night settled around them. The boys slept. The house grew quiet. Marcus and Celeste sat on the porch as had become their ritual. I thought about what you said. About finding something that is just for me. The painting. The painting. And I realized something. For years, I have defined myself by what I could do for others. My value was measured in lives saved, problems solved, needs met. When I stopped being constantly useful, I did not know who I was. And now I am learning. I am not there yet. But I am learning that I exist even when I am not serving someone else. That I have worth even when I am just sitting here, doing nothing, producing nothing, solving nothing. That is perhaps the hardest lesson. It is. I do not know if I fully believe it yet. But I am practicing believing it. And some days the practice feels almost real. The night air carried the scent of the garden. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The world continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human struggles and revelations. I love you, Marcus said. Not because of what you do for me or anyone else. I love the person you are when you are doing nothing at all. Celeste took his hand. I know. I'm trying to learn to believe that too. They sat in silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that requires no filling. Two people who had survived their own particular darknesses, still surviving, still learning, still choosing each other despite the complications. The summer ended. The boys started school, that great milestone that marked their transition from entirely domestic creatures to people with lives outside the home. Marcus walked them to the small schoolhouse on the first day. 3 small figures with matching backpacks and varying degrees of enthusiasm. The oldest approached the building with determination. The middle one raced ahead, eager for new experiences. The youngest hung back, watching, processing, reluctant to leave the familiar for the unknown. "You will be fine," Marcus told him. "I know." "Then why the hesitation?" "Because I do not want to forget how this feels. Standing here with you. Before everything changes." The boy was 5 years old. He should not have been capable of such awareness. But he had always been different. Always seen what others missed. "Things will change," Marcus said carefully. "That is what time does. But I will still be here when you come home. Promise." "Promise." The boy nodded, squared his small shoulders, walked toward the schoolhouse without looking back. Marcus stood at the edge of the schoolyard and watched his sons disappear into a building he could not follow them into. This was the first of many such moments. The first of many releases. The beginning of the long process of letting go that parenting ultimately required. He walked home alone. The house was quiet. Celeste was at the clinic, seeing the reduced roster of patients she had maintained. The silence was different now than it had been during his years of isolation. It was not accusatory. It was simply empty. He went to the garden. Began the small maintenance tasks that kept it flourishing. Pruning. Weeding. Checking the irrigation system they had installed the previous summer. The work was meditative. His hands remembered what to do. His mind could wander. He thought about the years ahead. The boys growing. The inevitable complications of adolescence. The eventual departure that all parents faced. He thought about Celeste. Her grief still surfacing in unexpected moments. Her gradual learning of how to exist without constant purpose. Her paintings improving slowly, each one a little more confident than the last. He thought about himself. The man he had been. The man he had become. The permanent gap between who he might have been if things had unfolded differently. There was no resolution to these thoughts. They simply existed, circling through his consciousness like weather patterns, changing and returning and never quite settling into final form. The afternoon passed. He collected the boys from school. They burst through the doors with stories and complaints and the urgent news of children who had experienced the world without their parents for the first time. The oldest had made a friend. The middle one had gotten in trouble for talking too much. The youngest had spent recess observing rather than participating, which his teacher noted with gentle concern. "They are all fine," Celeste said that evening, when Marcus reported the teacher's comment. "He is just taking his time." "I know. But I worry." "You worry about all of them. It is what parents do." "Is that normal?" "I do not know what normal is. But I know that love and worry seem to come together." The days continued. The boys adjusted to school. Celeste continued her gradual stepping back from the practice. Marcus maintained the house, the garden, the endless small tasks that kept a family functioning. There were no dramatic events. No crises that demanded immediate response. Just the steady accumulation of ordinary days that somehow, in aggregate, became a life. And yet the weight of the past remained. Not actively painful now, but present. A permanent undercurrent to whatever happiness the present provided. One evening, while the boys played in the garden and Celeste worked on a new painting, Marcus sat on the porch and allowed himself to feel it fully. The grief for the decade lost. The acceptance that those years were gone forever. The strange peace that came from no longer fighting what could not be changed. He was 52 years old. His sons were 5. By the time they were his current age, he would be 97, if he lived that long. The mathematics were stark and immutable. He would miss things. Could not help but miss things. This was the permanent cost of the time that was taken from him. But he was here now. Present. Watching his sons grow. Loving his wife. Tending the garden they had built from nothing. It was not enough to compensate for what was lost. Nothing could be enough for that. But it was what he had. And he had learned, painfully and slowly, that what you have is all you ever really get. The sun set over the garden. The boys came inside, dirty and tired and happy. Celeste put away her paints and started dinner. The evening routine commenced. Marcus watched it all with the attention of someone who understood how quickly time passed. How easily moments slipped into memory and memory faded into the blur that made up most of a life. He did not know how many more evenings like this he would have. No one ever knew. But he knew he would not waste the ones he got. This was not a happy ending. It was something more complicated and more true. It was an ongoing middle, a continued choosing, a daily decision to be present in a life that carried permanent losses alongside genuine joy. The dinner was loud and chaotic. The boys argued about nothing. Celeste intervened with the practiced patience of years. Marcus cleaned up the inevitable spills. When the children were finally in bed and the house grew quiet, he found Celeste on the porch, in what had become their place. They sat together without speaking. The night sounds surrounded them. The garden was invisible in the darkness, but its presence was felt. Eventually Celeste spoke. "I think I'm going to be all right." "I think so too. Not perfect. Not healed. Just all right. All right is more than I ever expected to have." She leaned into him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They sat in the darkness and felt the weight of everything they carried and the strange lightness that came from carrying it together. The night deepened. The stars emerged. Somewhere in the house, one of the boys cried out briefly in a dream, then settled. Marcus did not move. Did not want to disturb the moment. The peace was fragile and temporary, as all peace was. But it was real. And real was enough. It had to be enough. It was all anyone ever got. The autumn came early that year, stripping leaves from the trees before September had fully arrived. Marcus stood in the garden watching the first colors appear, the greens giving way to gold and rust, and felt the familiar melancholy that accompanied seasonal change. The boys were 7 now. 2 years of school had transformed them in ways that still surprised him. They spoke differently, moved differently, had opinions and friendships and interior lives that existed entirely outside their parents' awareness. The oldest had become serious about reading, consuming books faster than Marcus could provide them. He had questions about everything, demanding explanations that often exceeded what Marcus could offer. Why did people fight wars? What happened when you died? Why were some people poor while others were rich? Marcus answered as honestly as he could, which meant admitting ignorance more often than he would have liked. The boy accepted these limitations with a gravity that sometimes worried his parents. He expects too much of himself. Celeste observed one evening. He thinks he should understand everything. He gets that from both of us. The middle son remained chaos incarnate, though chaos that was learning to direct itself. He had discovered sports and threw himself into physical activity with the same lack of restraint he brought to everything else. His knees were permanently scraped. His clothes were permanently stained. He laughed more than anyone Marcus had ever known. The youngest continued to watch, to notice, to ask questions that pierced through comfortable assumptions and demanded real answers. It was the youngest who returned to the question that had been waiting for 2 years. They were in the garden, just the two of them, pulling weeds in the late afternoon light. The boy worked methodically, as he did everything, clearing a section before moving to the next. "Papa." "Yes." "You never told me about the pictures." Marcus's hands stilled in the soil. "You said it was a long story. Not for children. But I am not a little child anymore." The boy was 7. Still very much a child by any objective measure. But those grey eyes held something older, something that had always been there, waiting patiently for the truth. "You are right," Marcus said slowly. "I owe you an explanation." He sat back on his heels, wiping dirt from his hands. The boy waited with the stillness he had inherited from his mother. "Before I met your mother, before you and your brothers were born, I was married to someone else." The boy absorbed this without visible reaction. "She was not a good person. I did not know that when I married her. I thought she loved me. But she did not. She wanted to hurt me. Why? I do not know." Some people are broken in ways that make them want to break others. What did she do? She made me sick. Very sick. For a long time. And she made me believe it was my fault. The words were inadequate. How could you explain systematic poisoning to a 7-year-old? How could you convey the destruction of identity, the public humiliation, the decade of isolation that followed? When she left, I was very sad. So sad that I did not leave my house for many years. I stopped taking pictures. I stopped doing almost everything. The boy's expression shifted slightly. Processing. How many years? 10. 10 years is a very long time. It is. It was. What made you stop being sad? Marcus looked at his son. At the garden they sat in. At the house visible beyond the roses. Your mother. I found her during a storm. Or she found me. And she helped me get better. The boy nodded slowly. Is that why there are no pictures of you being young? Partly. Most of my pictures from before are gone. And during the years I was sad, I did not take any new ones. Do you have any pictures from when you were married to the bad person? Marcus hesitated. Somewhere, in boxes he had never opened since moving here, there might be photographs from that era. Images of the man he had been before the destruction. Images of her. I do not know. I have not looked. Maybe you should not look. The boy's voice was matter-of-fact. If she was bad, you do not need pictures of her. The simple wisdom of childhood. The clear moral categories that adulthood complicated beyond recognition. Maybe you are right. They returned to weeding. The conversation seemed to be over. But after several minutes of silence, the boy spoke again. Papa. Yes. I am glad the storm happened. So am I. And I am glad you found Mama. So am I. And I am glad you had us. Even if you had to be sad for a long time first. Marcus's throat tightened. That is the truest thing anyone has ever said to me. The boy did not respond. Just continued pulling weeds with methodical precision, as if they had been discussing nothing more significant than the weather. That night, Marcus told Celeste about the conversation. He asked directly. He has been thinking about it for 2 years. She was not surprised. He thinks about everything for a long time before he speaks. I did not tell him everything. Of course not. He is 7. But I told him enough. That I was married before. That she hurt me. That I was sad for many years. Celeste was quiet for a moment. How did he respond? He said he was glad the storm happened. That he was glad I found you. That he was glad we had them, even if I had to be sad first. That sounds like him. It does. They sat with the weight of what had been shared. The secret that was no longer entirely secret. The truth that had begun its slow emergence into their family's understanding. The other two will ask eventually. I know. Will you tell them the same thing? I will tell them what they need to know. What they can understand at whatever age they are when they ask. Celeste took his hand. You did the right thing. He needed to know. And he handled it well. He is stronger than I was at 7. He has not been through what you went through. No. And I hope he never will. The autumn deepened. The leaves finished their transformation and began their fall. The garden required different maintenance now, preparation for the dormancy that winter would bring. Marcus found himself thinking about legacy more often than he had before. Not in terms of wealth or reputation, the things he had once valued. In terms of what he would leave behind in the minds and hearts of 3 small people who would carry him forward after he was gone. The oldest would remember his seriousness. His careful answers to difficult questions. His presence in the garden, in the kitchen, at bedtime. Would those memories be enough to anchor the boy when life became difficult? Would they be enough to compensate for the father who tired easily and would not be there for everything that mattered? The middle son would remember energy meeting energy. Rough play and loud laughter and the physical presence of a father who tried to keep up despite his limitations. Would he understand, someday, what those efforts cost? Would he know that every chase through the garden was a small victory against a body that wanted to rest? The youngest would remember conversations. Weeding together. The truth that had finally been told. Would he carry that truth gently, or would it burden him? Would he understand that his father's sadness had a source and a story and had ultimately led to him? There was no way to know. Parents gave what they could and hoped it was enough. The results were never visible until long after the giving was done. Celeste continued her gradual emergence from exhaustion. The young doctor had become competent enough to handle most of the practice's demands. Celeste saw patients 3 days a week now instead of 6, and the days off were filled with painting and rest and the slow relearning of who she was when she was not serving others. Her paintings had improved. They hung on the walls of their home now, landscapes and still lifes, and one portrait that remained unfinished because she could not quite capture what she was trying to show. "What is it?" Marcus asked one evening, studying the portrait's incomplete features. "Benjamin. When he was healthy. Before the diagnosis. She had been working on it for months. Adding details, then painting over them. Approaching the image from different angles, never quite satisfied. I cannot get his eyes right," she said. "I remember exactly how they looked. But when I try to paint them, something is missing. Maybe some things cannot be captured. Maybe. Or maybe I am not ready to finish it. To make him permanent. As long as the painting is incomplete, I have a reason to keep working on him." Marcus understood. The reluctance to close a chapter. The way grief could masquerade as ongoing project. "There is no deadline." "No. There is not." She set down her brush. Stood back from the canvas. "Sometimes I wonder what he would think. Of all this. Of you. Of the boys. What do you think he would think?" "I think he would be happy for me." Benjamin was not possessive. He wanted people to be happy, even when that happiness did not include him. "He sounds like someone I would have liked." "You would have." Everyone liked him. It was impossible not to. They stood together, looking at the unfinished portrait. The face that was almost but not quite visible. The eyes that refused to be captured. "I think about him less than I used to," Celeste said quietly. "And when I realize that, I feel guilty. Like I am betraying him by moving on." "Moving on does not mean forgetting." "I know. But it feels that way sometimes. Like every happy moment with you is a moment I am taking away from his memory." Marcus did not have easy answers. He had his own ghosts, his own guilt, his own complicated relationship with the past. Maybe it is not taking away. Maybe it is adding. Making your life fuller rather than emptier. That is a nice way to think about it. Is it true? I do not know. But it is nicer than the alternative. The winter arrived. The garden went dormant. The boys spent more time indoors, which meant more chaos in smaller spaces, more demands on attention, more of the controlled disaster that family life required. Christmas approached with its attendant expectations and obligations. The boys wanted presents, specific and numerous, the result of exposure to classmates whose families had more disposable resources. "We cannot give them everything," Celeste said one evening, surveying the lists they had produced. "We can give them enough. Will they know the difference? They will learn." Christmas morning was loud and excessive and over too quickly. The boys tore through wrapping paper with the hunger of children who had not yet learned that anticipation often exceeded fulfillment. By noon, the new toys were already familiar, the excitement already fading, the eternal question of what's next already forming. Marcus watched his sons navigate their disappointment and felt the familiar mixture of frustration and compassion. They wanted so much. They understood so little about what wanting cost. "Is this it?" the oldest asked, surveying the aftermath of unwrapping. "This is it. But I wanted the other thing. The bigger one." "I know. But we chose these things instead." "Why?" "Because we cannot have everything we want. No one can." The boy frowned. Accepting logic without accepting its emotional implications. "That is unfair." "Yes, it is." There was nothing else to say. The unfairness of limited resources, of choices that precluded other choices, of wanting that exceeded having, these were lessons that could only be learned through experience. By evening, the boys had adjusted. The toys they had received became sufficient. The toys they had not received faded into the background of acceptable disappointments. Marcus helped them build something from a construction set, his hands less nimble than they had once been, his patience tested by instructions that assumed a level of dexterity he no longer possessed. "Papa, You are doing it wrong. I know. Show me how. The oldest took over, his small fingers more precise than Marcus's aging ones. The role reversal was slight but significant. The first of many moments when the children would become more capable than the father. There, the boy said, completing the step Marcus had bungled. You have to pay attention to the small pieces. Thank you. The evening settled into its usual rhythms. Dinner, baths, stories, the complex negotiations of bedtime. By the time the house was quiet, Marcus was exhausted in the deep way that holidays always produced. Celeste found him on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, watching the darkness. You will freeze. Not yet. She sat beside him, sharing the blanket, their breath visible in the night air. Another year. Another year. They sat in silence. The weight of time passing. The accumulation of Christmases that would continue until they did not. Do you think they had a good day? Marcus asked eventually. I think they had a real day. Good and bad and disappointing and exciting. All of it mixed together. Is that enough? It is what life is. So yes. It has to be enough. The new year arrived without ceremony. The boys returned to school. The garden remained dormant. Life resumed its patterns, familiar and relentless. Celeste finished the portrait of Benjamin in February. She did not announce it. Marcus simply noticed one evening that the eyes were complete. That the face was finally, fully visible. You finished it. I finished it. He looked at the painting. At the man who had loved his wife before Marcus knew she existed. The face was kind, as Celeste had described. The eyes held something that Marcus could not quite name. He looks peaceful. He was. Even at the end. He accepted what was happening with a grace I could not match. What will you do with it? She was quiet for a moment. I thought I would put it away. In storage. Somewhere safe but not visible. That seems right. Marcus did not ask if she was sure. Did not offer opinions about what she should feel or do. This was her grief, her history, her decision. I think I am ready to let him rest, she said. Not to forget him. Just to stop actively mourning. To move him from the center of my awareness to somewhere more peripheral. That sounds like healing. It feels like loss. Like I am losing him again by choosing to stop carrying him everywhere. Maybe healing and loss are the same thing sometimes. Maybe. The portrait went into storage. The space on the wall where it had hung remained empty for weeks before Celeste replaced it with something else. A landscape. The view from the garden in summer, painted from memory during winter, an act of faith that warmth would return. The spring did return. The garden woke. The boys grew another inch, another year older in every way that mattered. The oldest turned 8 with a party that exhausted everyone. The middle one insisted on a different cake than his brothers, asserting independence in the small ways available to children. The youngest asked for no party at all, just a quiet dinner with the family, which they provided. Different. Celeste observed afterward. 3 completely different people from the same circumstances. They always were. But it becomes more visible every year. The ways they diverge. The people they are becoming that we cannot control. Does that frighten you? Terrify me. But I cannot stop it. So I try to accept it instead. The acceptance was ongoing work. Every day brought new evidence that the boys were becoming themselves in ways their parents could not fully guide or understand. The oldest developed interests that neither Marcus nor Celeste shared. The middle one made friends they had never met and spoke of experiences they had not witnessed. The youngest maintained his observant silence, revealing little of his inner world to anyone. This is what we wanted. Marcus reminded himself. Independent children. People who could navigate the world without us. But wanting independence for your children and watching them achieve it were different things. The pride was real. So was the loss. Summer arrived again. They took another trip to the beach, the same one as before, now familiar enough to feel like tradition. The boys were different this time. More capable. More independent. They played without constant supervision, explored without constant fear, existed for hours in a world that did not include their parents. Marcus sat on the sand and watched them from a distance. Three figures against the vast backdrop of ocean and sky. Small enough to be fragile. Large enough to survive. Celeste sat beside him, her own attention divided between the children and the horizon. What are you thinking about? Time. As always. Anything specific about time? That we are halfway through something. They are 8. In another 8 years they will be 16. In another 8 after that, they will be grown. The mathematics of parenting. Every parent performed these calculations, measured the dwindling supply of years and days and moments. Does that frighten you? Yes. But less than it used to. Why? Because I have learned that fear does not change anything. The years will pass whether I am frightened or not. So I am trying to be present instead of afraid. That sounds like wisdom. It sounds like exhaustion. Wisdom and exhaustion often feel similar. The summer days accumulated. The boys bronzed and grew and created memories they would carry into adulthood. Marcus watched and participated and tried to remember everything, knowing he would forget most of it. The youngest came to him one evening as the sun was setting over the water. Sat beside him on the sand without speaking for a long time. Papa. Yes. I think about the story you told me. About before. What do you think? I think it is sad. But not only sad. What else? I think you are brave. For telling me. And for being here now. Marcus felt the words land in his chest. The simple assessment of a child who saw clearly what adults complicated with qualifications. Thank you. I do not think I am brave like you. You are braver than you know. How can you tell? Because bravery is not about not being afraid. It is about being afraid and doing things anyway. And I see you do that all the time. The boy considered this. Like what? Like going to school when you would rather stay home. Like asking questions when you are not sure of the answers. Like sitting here with me now, talking about difficult things. Those do not feel brave. They rarely do. But they are. The conversation ended there. The boy leaned against Marcus's side, watching the sunset, and they sat in a silence that needed no filling. That night, Marcus told Celeste about the exchange. He called you brave. He did. How did that feel? Strange. I do not think of myself as brave. What do you think of yourself as? She considered. Surviving. That is what I think of myself as. Someone who survived things and is still surviving them. Maybe surviving is a kind of bravery. Maybe. Or maybe it is just stubbornness. A refusal to stop existing even when existing is hard. The distinction seemed important, though Marcus could not articulate why. Either way, he sees something in you that you do not see in yourself. That matters. It does. It matters more than I expected. The summer ended. The boys returned to school. The garden began its slow decline toward winter. The cycles continued, indifferent to human drama, marked only by the passage of seasons and the growing of children. Marcus found himself thinking about endings more often now. Not his own death, though that too was increasingly present in his awareness. The endings that came before death. The ending of the boy's childhood. The ending of his physical capability. The ending of the life they had built together as it transformed into whatever would come next. Nothing lasted. This was not a new realization, but it had become more visceral as he aged. The beautiful garden would eventually return to wilderness. The house would pass to other hands. The boys would grow and leave and become people he could not fully know. And he would become a memory. Photographs in albums. Stories told at family gatherings. A presence that had once been central and would gradually fade to peripheral. This was not depressing. Or rather, it was depressing but also true, and Marcus had learned that truth was more valuable than comfort. He began documenting things. Not formally, not with any plan, just noting moments that seemed worth preserving. The way the oldest laughed when he was truly amused. The sound the middle one made when he was concentrating. The expression on the youngest's face when he understood something new. These observations went into a journal he did not share with anyone. A record of what was, in the full knowledge that what was would not remain. Celeste noticed the journal one evening. What are you writing? Nothing important. That means something important. He did not deny it. I am writing about them. About us. About what I want to remember when memory starts to fail. She was quiet for a moment. Is that happening? Memory failing? Not yet. But it will. Everything fails eventually. I want to prepare. That sounds morbid. It sounds practical. There is a difference. She sat beside him. Looked at the page he had been writing. You have beautiful handwriting. I had practice. Before. It was expected in business. I never knew that. There is a lot you do not know about before. Will you tell me someday? Maybe. If you want to know. I do. But only when you are ready. She did not push. This was one of the things he loved about her. The patience. The willingness to wait for what could not be forced. The journal accumulated pages. The seasons turned. The boys grew. The years passed in the way years do, slowly and then all at once. The oldest turned 10. An age that felt significant, the transition from single to double digits, the visible evidence that childhood was finite. A decade. Marcus said to Celeste. 10 years since they were born. 10 years since everything changed. For both of us. They celebrated with a small gathering. Family and the closest friends. Cake and presents and the rituals that marked such passages. Marcus watched his sons interact with the world and felt the familiar weight of all they did not know about him. The decade before they were born. The man he had been. The destruction he had survived. Someday they would learn more. The youngest already knew the outline. The others would ask eventually. And Marcus would have to decide how much truth was helpful and how much was burden. There were no easy answers. There never were, with the important things. The party ended. The guests departed. The house returned to its usual chaos, now featuring 3 10-year-olds who had opinions about bedtime and seemed to believe that double digits exempted them from rules. They were not exempted. The negotiations were exhausting. By the time silence finally descended, Marcus was empty in a way that felt familiar from his years of isolation. But this emptiness was different. It was the emptiness of giving rather than hiding. The exhaustion of presence rather than absence. He sat on the porch despite the cold. Celeste joined him with tea and blankets, and they huddled together against the chill. 10 years. 10 years. We made it this far. We did. Further than I expected, honestly. What did you expect? I do not know. When they were born, I could not see past the next feeding, the next diaper, the next crisis. The idea of them being 10 seemed impossible. And now? Now I cannot see past the next crisis either. It is just that the crises have changed. She laughed. The sound was warm in the cold air. That is the best we can do. Navigate the current crisis. Trust that we will navigate the next one too. Is that wisdom? It is exhaustion. We have already established they are similar. They sat in the cold and the dark and the quiet. 2 people who had survived their separate destructions and found each other and built something that continued to exist despite the odds. The future remained unknown. The past remained immutable. Only the present was available, and even that was slipping away with every passing second. But for now, for this moment, they were together. The boys were safe inside. The garden lay dormant but alive beneath its winter sleep. It was not enough to compensate for what was lost. Nothing could be. But it was what they had. And what they had was real. The silence stretched between them. Not empty. Full. Complete in a way that needed no addition. Thank you. Marcus said eventually. For what? For the door. For opening it that night. For letting a stranger in. You were not a stranger for long. Long enough that you could have turned me away. You chose not to. Everything that followed came from that choice. Celeste was quiet for a moment. I think about that night sometimes. What would have happened if I had not answered the door? If you had died in that storm? I would have deserved it. No. You would not have. You did not deserve what happened to you. Any of it. The words were not new. She had said them many times over the years. But they still landed with weight. Still mattered. I am glad you opened the door. I am glad you knocked. They sat together as the night deepened. The cold became more insistent. Eventually they would have to go inside, return to the warmth, prepare for the next day's demands. But not yet. For now, they could remain here, in the quiet space they had created between the chaos of the past and the uncertainty of the future. The present. The only place anyone could actually live. The only time that was ever really real. Marcus breathed in the cold air and felt it sharp in his lungs. Felt the weight of his wife beside him. Felt the knowledge of his sons sleeping safely inside. This was enough. It had to be enough. It was all anyone ever got. And accepting that, finally and completely, was perhaps the closest thing to peace he would ever know. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. The night continued its ancient patterns. The world went on as it always had, as it always would, with or without any particular human to witness it. But Marcus was here now. Witnessing. Present. Alive. And that was everything. That was the whole point. That was all there was. The silence held them both. Not empty. Full. Complete. They sat until the cold became unbearable, then rose and went inside together, leaving the darkness to itself. The door closed behind them with the soft click of arrival. They were home. They had made it home. And for now, that was enough. And that, my beloved listeners, is where we leave them. Not at an ending, because there are no true endings for the living. At a moment. A stillness. A breath between what was and what will be. Some stories conclude with fanfare and resolution. This one concludes with a door closing softly and two people entering the warmth they have built together. That is what life offers, when we are fortunate. Not the redemption we imagine. Not the compensation we feel we are owed. Just moments. Just presence. Just the ongoing choice to keep showing up for the people we love. If this story has meant something to you, carry it gently. Share it with those who need to know that survival is possible. That broken things can be rebuilt. That the time we lose does not have to define the time we have left. Thank you for walking this road with me. Thank you for caring about these people who exist only in our shared imagination. Thank you for being part of this family we have built together, one story at a time. This is Tales of Desire with Mr. Walker. Until we meet again, remember that every moment of presence is a small victory against the darkness. And small victories, accumulated over a lifetime, become everything. Be gentle with yourselves. Be patient with your healing. Be present in your lives. The door is always open. You just have to knock. The end.